Hello, and welcome to Stowe Talks, a podcast designed to support people going through a relationship breakdown and all of the challenges this brings. I'm Matthew Taylor.
And I'm Lisa Gatchell, family lawyers at Stowe Family Law. And today we're delighted to welcome back to the podcast Dr. Sue Palmer-Conn, aka the Divorce Doctor, a highly experienced and specialist divorce coach, as we explore the tricky question faced by people in relationships sometimes: should I stay or should I go? So first of all, thank you so much, Sue, for coming back on the podcast. I think you were one of our very first guests when we had a discussion about the menopause, I believe, and that feels like a lifetime ago. For anyone that hasn't listened to that episode, and if you haven't, you should go back and listen to it. But if you haven't, can you give us an introduction to yourself so that everybody knows kind of your history and what it is that you do?
Okay, I'm Sue Palmer-Conn, aka the Divorce Doctor, as Lisa said, and I'm a divorce coach and discernment counsellor. I've been working in this role for about 12 years now, alongside, at first, an academic job. I qualified I got a PhD in psychology, worked as an educational psychologist for several years, and then transitioned over to forensic psychology, working with prisoners who got attachment disorders. So that sort of lends itself to divorce, because a lot of the time we have disorders of attachment, etc. So I got divorced at the age of 50 after what I thought was a happy marriage. And I'm sure now, looking back, had discernment counselling or even divorce coaching been around in those days, things might have turned out very different, because we've got more in common now than we ever had when we were married. And we've I say co-parented, they were adult kids, but we never fell out. We went to all the kids' weddings and christenings and all the rest of it. But I think, looking back, although I'm in a much better place, I wonder what would have happened had somebody said to us, what's the problem? What's your role in it? And can we talk it through?
So that's, I guess, the main thrust of this conversation today. Should I stay or should I go? So apart from making everyone sing The Clash for the rest of forever as that earworm rattles around all of our heads, let's delve into that a little bit. And that's linked to, so the decision, do you end a marriage? Do you end a relationship, or do you keep going? And that links to something that you've touched on, discernment counselling, which is probably a new phrase for a lot of people. So I wonder if you can talk to people about what discernment counselling is and fundamentally how that can help people to make the decision about the future of their relationship.
Yeah, I mean, when couples are in conflict or they've drifted apart more often than not, it's not, people come to me and they say, oh, we're not talking properly, or we're not intimate anymore. But what is actually happening is that they're losing connection and drifting apart. And it's never one single cut that separates them off. It's lots of little cuts. And if we can talk that through and help people to look at, discernment means making a decision. And sometimes we jump into making decisions about our relationships because something big has happened, and we forget that the rest of it has been fairly good. And we find that very often one person is leaning out of the relationship and the other person is leaning into the relationship. When they first start talking about, this isn't working, I'm not happy, they either jump straight into, I'm going to see a solicitor and get divorce started off, or they say, right, we'll go to marriage guidance. And if one person is leaning out of a relationship, marriage guidance isn't going to work, because they assume that both people are on the same line, on the singing from the same song sheet, they both want to work on the relationship, and that's not always the case. And so discernment counselling is the bit in between. It's the bridge between marriage guidance and going straight down the divorce route.
And how does that work in practice then, Sue? Is that something that couples do together? Can they do it individually? Is it a big, does it take a long time? If someone was thinking, okay, that sounds like it might be good for me, what's it actually involve, practically speaking?
The whole point of it is to get the couple, and I work with the couple rather than individuals, although most of the work is done individually within the session. Get them to a point where they're confident and clear that they're making a decision based on deeper understanding of the relationship. So they start off with 3 options, and I call it mend it, bend it, or end it, or make up, break up, or shake up. And we start off with the couple in the room together or online together, and we look at 4 different questions. One is, what is the problem? And understanding the problem that's got them to this point from each person's viewpoint. And you very often find that they've got different views of what has actually gone wrong. The second one is, what have you actually done about it? Whether they've been to see a marriage counsellor or they've tried to work on it themselves. But very often, that what they've tried, they know it hasn't worked, and so they're ready to jump into the next stage without really considering what else they could have done. The third one is, what role, if any, have the children played in this? So have they stayed together because of the children, or have they got very different views on parenting that's tearing them apart? And then the fourth one is, let's end on a good note and think about the good times. What were the happy times? Because people forget about the happy times. So once we've gone through the bit together, and that usually takes about half an hour, I then take them off individually and go through in more detail what they see as their role in the breakdown of the relationship, and what can they do to change, what needs to change fundamentally about themselves and about the relationship for them to want to give it another go.
That's really interesting, actually. I've had a couple of clients recently that have attended or attempted marriage counselling, and unfortunately that hasn't been successful. And some of the feedback that I've received is that they felt that the other party was just there to receive validation, that, you're doing X, Y, and Z wrong, and I need somebody else to tell you that you're doing that wrong so that you can, not do it again in the future. Yeah. So it's really interesting to hear then that actually both parties, for this to work, need to attend, and with the full realization that they're going to have to work on themselves and that they will be playing a part in whatever the problems are in the relationship, because it takes 2 for relationships to work or break down, and then work on that. That's quite a step, isn't it? Do you find that there are particular trigger points or stress points in relationships that this type of counselling, that you see more often in this type of counselling?
As I say, that the biggest cause of breakdown is disconnection, whether that's social disconnection, emotional disconnection, or physical disconnection. And those are things that we work on. How far down the disconnection tree have you got, and how can we move you back up? And before they can get to emotional connection, they've got to connect back socially. And very often you find that because they're not getting on, they're not doing things together, they're not planning things, or that if they do, they're just going through the motion, or one person is doing all the planning and the other one is just following. And getting them then to both commit to going full out to try and understand what's gone wrong and what they can do about it. Discernment counselling isn't about getting the marriage back on track. It's getting them to the point where they make the decision of whether they should stay or go. And if they're going to stay, are they just going to carry on as they are? Or are they going to actually work on the marriage and get it back into a really good state? But whether they decide to stay or go, because they've gone through this period of personal discovery and agenda for change, they're a different person anyway. So whether they go back into the relationship full steam ahead, they're going in as a different person. Even if they decide in the end that, the enough is enough and, they'd be better separate, they fundamentally have changed. And so if they go into another relationship later, they're not taking the baggage with them.
I'm just interested what is there a kind of like a percentage split between, the number of people who say, let's give the marriage another try, or those who say, actually, we think we do want different things in life? I'm just interested in what the outcomes look like from
it. It's about 55% say that they will give it a go, another go.
Okay.
About 40% say, let's go our separate ways, but let's try and do it amicably and collaboratively. And the other 5% or so say, we'll stay together, but we're not going to do anything about it. We'll just muddle through as we have been doing. Those are usually people that are either older couples who don't want to rock the apple cart too late in life, or people that have got caring responsibilities.
And the ones who then decide to go their separate ways, I mean, presumably the hope, you sort of alluded to it there, that the hope and the idea is that it should allow for a more amicable, and I slightly hate the word amicable, we use it all the time, I've never really come up with a better one, but so I'm going to roll with it, but a divorce that's maybe a bit more human, a bit more compassionate, a bit less litigatey fight. Is that fair to say? Is that the aim? Does that work?
Yeah. I call it dignified rather than amicable.
Dignified is better than amicable.
And what I do then is I will work with them as a couple and help them to go through mediation or a one couple, one lawyer type of divorce, or even if they do a collaborative divorce, to make sure that they're both pulling the same way, that they're keeping the children right in the centre. They understand that if they go to litigation, it's a win-lose situation, and what we're looking for is a win-win situation, so that we can then work through what's best for them as a family. The whole point is to get to a point where we get what's best for us as individuals, us as a couple, us as a family, and going forward, can we still continue to work together?
So how long does this sort of process take? And I appreciate that's kind of like how long is a piece of string, but working from sort of making that decision, how many sessions would you say that you would usually have?
It's a very, very structured thing, and
Okay.
it's a maximum of 5 sessions. Occasionally we have a 6th session. If it probably takes 3 or 4 sessions to get to a point where they're both making the same decision, whether that's to stay or to go. And then the next 1 or 2 sessions will be, what's this going to look like, and what process are we going to use to get through? And then the final one, sometimes they come back and say, we've just got a few loose ends to tie up, especially if they're going to go down the separate route. I'm trying to get them to think, because most people are saying, oh, I want 50-50 with the children, but can they do 50-50? And I try to work with them to think in terms of quality, not quantity, of time with the children, so that everybody is getting the best deal, including the children.
Is there a different... so this is quite a gendered and heteronormative question, but is there a difference in the way that men and women, husbands and wives, approach this? Because I hear a lot from female clients, when I suggest discernment counselling or marriage guidance counselling, I hear a lot, look, he's just not that way. He won't talk about these things. We all know that, men are less good at talking about things and are more prone to bottling up feelings. And, lots of the mental health kind of studies and research kind of supports that, so that women are generally better at expressing themselves and dealing with things emotionally. That's an obstacle I often hear when I suggest something like that to my female clients. And if I suggest it to male clients, then often they'll be a bit like, try and move the conversation on incredibly quickly, like they just want to engage with that. Is that common? And what can I do to kind of work around that, do you think?
Strangely enough, the majority of people that contact me for discernment are males.
Well, that's just proved me totally wrong then. Brilliant. Okay, well, there we go.
Yeah, I'm surprised by that.
Yeah, okay. Well, there you go. Premise of the question is complete nonsense, clearly.
No, they do find it difficult to open up initially. By the end, I don't know whether I'm a bit, come on a bit strong with them sometimes, but I don't hold back in the questions that I ask them. And by the end, they are grateful that they've actually been able to open up about their emotions, because they've bottled them up for so long. But it's just, I don't know what it is. It's whether the men are frightened that, the woman is wanting this divorce and they don't, or whether they want it and they want validation. But by the end, I'm not validating one person over the other. And whatever the outcome is, they talk a lot more openly. I mean, I had one couple who I would have, if I was a betting person, I would have said they're going to go their separate ways. But by the end, they would come to Crosby, where I live, and at the end of the sessions, they'd go out onto the beach and they'd walk along and reflect on what we talked about. And then on the way back, they would talk together in the car. And at the end, they were saying, I can't believe how much we're talking. We realise now that we have got so much more in common, and we'd forgotten about our core values and forgotten about how much we enjoy different things. And it is just opening up that channel of conversation.
I think that's a major issue, though, isn't it? Is communication in all relationships. Things have changed so much, but at the beginning of a relationship, you talk all the time. You go on dates where it's just the two of you. You speak on the phone. There's text. There's a whole array of communication. And then as relationships go on, that does tend to, don't want to say in my experience, but it does tend to reduce and change over time, because things become more about children, work. You don't necessarily have the same time to go out together. You really have to prioritize that. You really have to make that a thing that you're going to do, rather than it just coming really easily. It's probably not the right question, but what can people be doing sort of to keep that communication flowing through their relationship, so they don't get to a point 5, 10, 15 years down the line when suddenly they haven't been able to talk for a period of time, and it then creates these bigger problems?
Fundamentally, people plan the wedding, but they don't plan the marriage. Yeah. And they don't talk about things like, childcare, what are their childcare styles and things like that. Are we going to do it the way I was brought up or the way you were brought up? How are we going to handle conflict? If one comes from a a family where everything is bottled up and the other comes from a shouty family, how are they going to cope with that? And then things like career. If I get promotion, will you move with me? I hadn't thought about that one. Or I was just astounded the number of people who had children, but they'd never planned whether they were going to have children, how many children they wanted, what they were going to do, how they were going to be schooled. And, there's all these fundamental things that need bringing out before you get married.
Yeah, I was just thinking when you said about that, not thinking about children, I think it was, I can just relate it to, you knew that I wanted children, talked about having children. And I just remember being past this newborn baby and being like, well, what do I do now? Like, I've read all these books about pregnancy. I've read all these books about the bit up to actually having the baby. And then suddenly being like, we haven't actually talked about what happens after, which is actually the big bit, isn't it? It's not the 9 months before, it's the.
But I think you also don't know what to say. Like, I wouldn't have known my parenting style before I was a parent. We did like NCT classes and stuff, and most of it's about the kind of the actual pregnancy and the labour and stuff, like, for very obvious reasons. I think it's very hard to kind of say, I think I'll be this kind of parent, because it's just something that's so like alien to you before you have one. But I can totally, I've heard you say before about planning the wedding and not planning the marriage, and I think that is right. People get fixated on the big day and things. What about and then there's obviously, to get that communication and being open about the way you think things might go in the future is something that would really help people start married life well. But for people who are currently, mid-marriage, and maybe they are in the phase where conversation is quite mundane, it's okay, who's taking little Johnny to football, who's taking little Susie to ballet. I've been very gendered today. This is not intentional, right? Little Johnny's going to ballet, who's taking him, and who's taking Susie to football? That's the conversation. It's how was work, have a bit of a moan about it. How do you break that rut? Because you can't go back to, Lisa was talking about when you're dating and you're discovering things about people and everything's like new and magical and wonderful, and the honeymoon period. You can't discover stuff again. So if you're in one of those cycles or a rut or whatever it is, and you feel that conversation is quite transactional, what can couples be doing then to kind of bring back a bit of the magic and start to reconnect individually?
I think fundamentally they need to take interest in each other. So many couples, when one parent comes home from work, the other one doesn't say, how was your day? Tell me one good thing, like you do with children when they come out of school. What went well at school? Because if you say what happened today, they say nothing. But if you say, tell me one good thing that you did at school, then they'll talk. And it's the same with adults. Tell me one good thing that happened. What went well today? Or what do you need support with? So it's becoming each other's best friends again, and taking an interest and surprising each other. Take it in turns to have a fun date, even if it's going bungee jumping or a bit more sedate going bowling.
Look, I say that's quite a terrifying date.
There's no way you're getting me on a bungee jump. And I was kind of hoping that you weren't going to say you have to take an interest in the other person's interests, because my husband I've become a bit of a golf widow. And there's no way I want to be on a golf course either. I'll do lots of things, but golf does not interest me in the slightest.
No, but you could say, right, okay, go out first thing in the morning, do the back 9, and I'll meet you for breakfast.
I think it's obviously important in relationships. You've got your own interests and your own personalities. I think one of the problems is that, and something here all the time, is that as time goes on and you've got caring responsibilities, and possibly you're in that sandwich period where you're caring for both children and elderly parents, and you're at your sort of most stressful kind of job period, maybe in your 40s or early 50s, and sort of key responsibilities, but also maybe still trying to progress. So you've got a lot of pressures on. Clients will just say, well, I've just not got time. There's no time to go and do things on on a weekday evening. We've barely got time to spend together. I've certainly not got time to spend on my own. That, if that's an objection that people are saying, well, it's all well and good, and in an ideal world, yes, we'd love to go off bungee jumping, but there's practical considerations. How do you get around those sort of obstacles?
That can be really difficult, especially if you are isolated from wider family. But there's always child swap. You have my kids this weekend.
What, permanently?
I was going to say, you haven't met my youngest. Nobody's offering.
Can you upgrade?
No, we used to take it in turns to have children from.
Yeah.
I'll have yours this weekend, you have mine next weekend, so that we can have some time together.
Yeah, I mean, I guess there's often solutions to these things. These are some of the obstacles that I think get pointed out a lot, and presumably are obstacles that crop up in your sessions. I mean, what are the other sort of? I know everyone's relationship is different and individual. There are other sort of common themes that you find that crop up during your sessions.
I think probably the most common is concentrating either on the children, so all the time is spent with the children and the other one feels neglected, or spending all the time in work and having no time at home, and that means both the kids and the partner feels neglected. And it's balancing time out, getting a balance between life and work. It can go too far in either direction. What common things have you heard from your clients?
Definitely having children, newborn babies. I mean, that is for people that have a baby to fix a relationship. I mean, for me, that's just like babies are one of the massive stretch points when you've got a newborn baby at home. And then equally, probably when the children leave home.
Yeah.
And then at retirement, I would say those are the three big stress points that I see.
Yeah, I think they're the I completely agree with that in terms of timeframes in people's lives is when the relationship becomes under the most pressure. I think if I had to pick one, it's probably the kids leaving home time, and I think often that is the time at which a relationship breaks down, and there's probably been stuff that's been unresolved going back to the previous incident of when the kids were little, because it's so hard, it's so stressful, especially if you've got that work dynamic that can be difficult if one or both of you has got busy jobs, but then lots of people will do the stay together for kids thing, and you get to the empty nest part and realize it's kind of too late to have done the work. That this is something I hear, so well, if we'd have talked about things 10 years ago, maybe things would be fine and we'd be able to fix it, but we've just drifted apart completely, and that's when there are completely different interests. Yeah. And the sort of the Venn diagram of the spouses and the areas where they intersect, I think that you start the relationship, you're almost two concentric circles overlapping, and gradually that drifts apart and drifts apart and drifts apart is the way I always feel about it. And then you get these sorts of pinch points, and yeah, retirement can be one as well, because people, some people bury themselves in work and then do that to the exclusion of everything else, and when the work disappears, it's kind of a bit of a bereavement for some people, isn't it? And if that goes, and if your whole personality is bound up with your job and you've been neglecting the other part of your life, you come back home and suddenly the main part's gone. That can be really...
and that fits in exactly, sort of the concentrating on the children too much and neglecting the partner, or concentrating on the job too much and neglecting the partner. And those, I've not had couples with young children come to discernment, but the majority of them are soon to be empty nesters and or retiring. So that your experience really does overlap with what I'm finding with discernment.
It's the points where you've got the magnifying glass in the relationship, isn't it? It's just those points where suddenly it's like, oh, we've been really, really busy, and now it's just me and you, and oh, we've got nothing to say to each other because we haven't put that effort and that time in and had that communication.
Yeah.
So you can completely see how it happens.
Do you think there's anything to the idea that fundamentally a lot of people now really live too long to be married to one person? I mean, obviously, if you go back to the start of marriage as an institution and being a religious and a sort of patriarchal device and kind of about property, and people didn't live that long, and people would be married for like 20 years and they would be then getting into sort of an advanced age, and as time goes by and people are then living for 70, 80, 90, however many years, then it is a very, very, very long time to be together with someone else, and it seems to me marriage rates have declined and divorce rates have increased over the years. And I've sort of read things where people have said, well, look, this is just to expect people to stay together for that length of time is really asking the improbable. And some people will do it, but they will be the outliers. Do you think there's anything to that, or is that just outrageous cynicism?
No, not at all. Not at all. When you look at the time when the marriage vows as they are now, till death us do part, the average life expectancy was 35.
And then most people don't get married until about 35.
Yeah, exactly.
And then we'll live, at age 35, your expected life expectancy is about another 50 years, give or take.
Yeah.
And we almost have various different lives within that life as well. So we talk about different seasons and different decades, but I know like 20-year-old me, 30-year-old me, and what will be 40-year-old me are going to be three completely different people to some extent, because of like living situations and work and sort of all those external factors. You do change a lot. And I suppose to some extent, is it just a bit of luck that the person that you're with is somebody that happens to change with you in those seasons and goes along? And a bit of bad luck, if you like, if actually you change too much to be able to come back together, and you just become too different.
And that's often the case, that one person grows and the other one stays stagnant, and that's the most difficult relationship to get back together. But discernment is all about, should I stay or should I go? And sometimes leaving the relationship is the best decision that you can make, because you're not going to make each other happy. And you get to 50 and you might still have another 40 years. So if it's the right decision to make, that you go your separate ways, let's go our separate ways and both be happy.
Yeah, and I think that's a nice attitude. And there's often a sense of failure around divorce, and it probably helps to avoid that and going, well, you know what, it worked well, and now we're going to leave on a positive note. And when you've got a number of years left ahead of you, I'm just going to come back to that very subtle flex from Lisa of not yet turning 40. Thanks for that little dig, which made me feel old.
I've only got 8 weeks to go.
Right, fine. But you'll make the most of those 8 weeks. But at sort of at our age, and I have just turned 40, there's still going to be a number of years ahead. And for most clients who tend to divorce in their, kind of late 40s is kind of about the average, it's a long way to go. So I think that attitude of kind of saying, okay, well, it doesn't mean that the marriage has been a failure. People often speak in those terms. It can be really positive. You've had some great times. It's just run its natural course. And therefore, how can you look on positively? And so I think that's a really nice message. And we always like to finish positively on these podcasts for anyone who's listened before. So, that's a nice way to bow out. Although I wonder if you can perhaps sum things up for the audience a little bit, Sue, and, just go back to what we're talking about. When at the sort of the top of the show, should I stay or should I go? What are your top tips for someone who is having that thought process at the moment?
Take your time in the decision. Don't jump into divorce too quickly. Don't force someone into marriage guidance, but take the time to actually think about the present and the future. And making that decision is something that isn't going to be easy to do on your own. And if you can find somebody that can help you to look at all the positives and change the negatives into positives, because, as you know, divorce isn't just one door closing, it's opening a door to a new future. So, divorce isn't always a negative. It can be a very positive experience, as I can testify.
So that's it for this episode of Stow Talks. Thanks for listening. Thank you so much, Sue, for joining us again. You can find out more about all the work Sue does supporting people going through a relationship breakdown at her website, divorce-doctor.com. If you would like more information on our podcast, head over to stowtalks.co.uk and please rate, like, share and review this podcast where you can.